I wanted to show you some updates that we've recently made to the SharePoint Developer documentation. So if I just go over to aka.ms.sp.dev.docs, it's going to take me to the SharePoint Development docs. Now, the only change that we made was related to the table of contents on the left. I'm going to walk through some of the changes, but let me kind of explain a couple things up front. First of all, while I'm presenting this, and while if you go back and you look at the commit history and the PRs and everything, yes, I'm the one that did this, but this is not me doing this. This is similar to that issue list updates that we made recently as well. I was just the implementer. This was done in close coordination and with the approval of Microsoft. I kind of gave my two ideas. I got input from Microsoft and Vesa. We worked a lot on this. This was carefully planned out. It was not just something that just happened out of the blue. Well, I guess if you just went to the navigation one day and saw it change, it was out of the blue for you. One of the other things that we looked at as well with the docs, the SharePoint development documentation has got a lot of old content in it. The docs are absolutely huge. There's a ton of content here, and it's evolved over time, but there are parts of the content that are, I don't want to say they're outdated, but they could use some refreshing. And frankly, it's kind of comes down to a little bit on availability of time, how often the content is accessed, how when the questions come up about the content, and priorities and schedules and resource allocation and blah, 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 all that stuff that you always hear these things kind of come up about this. So yes, we know that some stuff is older, and we've done something to make it a little obvious that that's the case. Now, another thing I want to say before we get started with this is let's review what the current guidance is from Microsoft. Whether you're in SharePoint Online, SharePoint On-Prem, being SharePoint 2019, 2016, the guidance is that you should be extending SharePoint, customizing SharePoint using the SharePoint framework, and you should be using the modern experience when it's available. I know that it's not available in 2016, but you should be using the SharePoint framework. When that is not available to you, or when that does not meet your needs, we have other development models. Like prior to the SharePoint framework, we had the add-in model. Prior to that, we had features and solutions and farm and sandbox-based solutions. None of this stuff has been removed. None of it's been deprioritized. But the order of what you should be using to go through and to customize your SharePoint environment, depending on which environment you're using, depending on what you're trying to do, goes SharePoint framework, then add-ins, then legacy style customizations. The navigation in the table of contents is designed around that. And couple of the things that we've done is to try and make things easier to find and to surface them based on what people are looking for. I've taken some of the motivation or some of the inspiration in the changes we made from the latest update that the Microsoft Teams group did, where I'm really wanting to focus on two different scenarios. One is that you are an experienced SharePoint developer and you know what you're looking for. So I know I'm looking for APIs. I know I'm looking for the SharePoint framework docs. I know I'm looking for Office add-ins. We want to make that very easy for you to find. But we also wanted to make it easy for people to find stuff who are brand new to the SharePoint platform. And what am I supposed to do? So with that change, there's one gigantic change that I made that, at least personally for me, it drove me nuts. And that was in the previous navigation, we had a section called features, but as I'm sure many of you know, that's actually a thing inside of SharePoint. That was introduced in 2007. But the way we were using it in the navigation when we said features really meant more like a capability and not a folder with a bunch of XML in it. So what we've done is we've renamed that to capabilities and features. So it's more like, what can I do with the product? And anything that is related to anything that's kind of like the grab bag that doesn't fit any specific development model. For example, customization or declarative-based customizations like site theming or list formatting or site designs and site scripts or concepts around Office 365 groups and hub sites, working with the site footer. And you see the other stuff that's listed there. We wanted to put that stuff inside of one section, inside of capabilities and features, so it wasn't buried away somewhere else. Oh yeah, and if we get too far with this, if something doesn't make sense to you, I definitely want feedback. Send us feedback. Send us a message here in this chat here so we can actually take a look at it. But mostly, please go through and put it in the SharePoint issue list, the SharePoint Dev Docs issue list, so we can follow it. One of the other things that you will see too is there's a lot of places. Actually, this is a bad example because I just found a problem. There's a lot of places where when you would open up one of these navigation elements, you would see the exact same name as the one you just opened listed right here. And it's a little confusing. It's like, well, if I went here, why didn't it just go here? This is the way it used to work. And actually, well, it's the way it works right now as well, but we're going to fix that. The way it should work, though, is that when you open up an item like Hub Sites, you see this overview page. This takes you to the page that you used to go to, but it doesn't give you like that extra little nesting there. That might have just bothered me. It might have bothered a few other people, but if it just bothered me, I mean, I just wanted to show you, hey, we made this change, and you can rest assured that I now sleep better, and I don't get as frustrated looking at the docs. That's a joke. Other things we did here. So around SharePoint Framework, we did a lot of reorganization here. So we got an overview of what the SharePoint Framework is. You got a Getting Started section. How can I dive right into this? Web parts. You're going to notice some things change with web parts. Instead of it just diving in and start showing you a tutorial, which has now been moved over here, here's a tutorial of doing all these different things, or getting started. This is really a tutorial like going through 1, 2, 3, 4 steps. In the past, we had those 4 steps mixed in with a bunch of other stuff. And so you couldn't really tell what was step 1, step 2. Now we've kind of broken these things up. You'll also see things like we've broken out working with web part properties in the property pane. We've broken those things up, how to go through and extend the property pane. That's its own section. We've got things here about concepts and scenarios. So things that are general about web parts, but they aren't like, they're not going to have full sections dedicated to them. Like, how do I hide it from the toolbox? Or how do you configure the icon? Or how do you pre-configure web parts? Those things are in concepts and scenarios. You're going to see a node concepts and scenarios across multiple places in the nav. You'll see things here like, how do I work with Microsoft Teams? So here's a bunch of articles here about working with Microsoft Teams or working with add-ins. Same thing, same kind of organization concept with extensions. We did the same thing. Now you're going to see here, we only have 3 extensions listed where technically we have 4 now. We have app customizers, we have field customizers, list view command sets, and query extensions. You see app customizers is missing. That's kind of the awkward one because that's the one that's used here inside the getting started for going through and deploying a new extension. So that is covered. And again, concepts and scenarios, tenant-wide deployment, pre-allocated placeholders. Oh yeah, another good topic here, tenant-wide deployment. Well, check this out. We have a whole section now in SharePoint Development, not specific to SharePoint Framework, but around SharePoint Development about all about setup and deployment. We even have a page dedicated to 2016 support. We have a page dedicated to 2019 support as well. Let's see. Oh, another one this is a change that I love that we did this. Well, I mean, I did this, so I'm happy we did it. So anyway, there's more stuff that you can go take a look at here inside SharePoint Framework. Around SharePoint add-ins, or we have actually not add-ins. So add-ins is just, this is all pretty obvious here. It's just the same kind of setup as what we had with the section before with add-ins. But what I really wanted to show you here is we have this SharePoint APIs. If you know what you're looking for, oh my gosh, this is so much better. We used to have the SharePoint REST API buried away, and we had a navigation item that said SharePoint REST API, and another one that said SharePoint REST API v2. We actually got questions. Well, where's the v1? It's like, well, it's the one that doesn't have anything listed by it. It's like, so we just added a v1, make it simpler. ALM and lifecycle management for ALM APIs that got moved over here. We've got PMP API related links. They're not buried with all the other PMP stuff because maybe somebody is looking for an API. So it makes more sense to go to APIs. So we have that here. Scenario guidance and archive are the 2 sections that are the older content that, yes, it would be great if we could have 20 people go in and spend the next 3 months refreshing this content and updating it. But right now we wanted to just indicate, we used to have a section called SharePoint Development Overview, and that was what archive was. Well, a lot of people went to that first, and that's not what we wanted them to do. We wanted them to go to like Getting Started or SharePoint Framework or SharePoint add-ins. So we renamed it to archive. It's the best of all of the worst options that we had available to us. And it's simply, we use the word archive to try and communicate, if you need some of the old stuff, this is old guidance here, right? These things may get moved around and updated and refreshed over time, but right now, this is where it is. Same thing with scenario guidance. Some of this stuff is older guidance. Some of it is newer stuff. Like you've got things about remote provisioning. That's obviously that's current, and that makes a lot of sense. Remote timer job framework that was discussed earlier. The Office 365 CLI, the PowerShell reference, all that stuff that's inside this scenario guidance. The last thing that I want to highlight here too, we had the section here for schema reference. I've refactored this a little bit to make sure if you know that you're looking for a specific schema, be it a JSON schema, be it a Office add-in schema, feature schema, solution, whatever it is, it's all right here. It's in one spot. And we also have a page here for 2 pages, one for SharePoint Community and one for support and feedback. And we have a whole thing where it talks about, on the overview page, it explains, what kinds of things are you looking for? Programming questions, here's where they go, documentation bugs, sample application bugs, go to the different repos that are available to us to submit your issue, feature request guidance, how to go about submitting an issue. We explain that. Actually, we redirect right over to the issue list. Looks like I've got some work to do with all these triages. But anyway, there's a lot of stuff that we did here. We've got this section here for tutorials that was here before, and it points to the same links of where the stuff was before. This page could definitely get updated as we have more tutorials get launched. So lots of changes, just lots of reorganization, and I hope that is interested and they like the changes we had. If not, send us some feedback.